Movies, documentaries, and every animated prehistoric film you watched as a kid have sold you a very specific fantasy about the Ice Age. Brave hunters in fur cloaks, roaring fires, and heroic mammoth chases that somehow always end in a warm communal feast. But here's the thing. The real Ice Age was nothing like that. It was a frozen, violent, calorie-desperate nightmare where every single day was a fight you could easily lose. Today we're pulling back the fur curtain and exploring what life during the Ice Age was actually like. And before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us which part of this video genuinely surprises you. People wildly underestimate just how cold things actually were. At the peak of the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago, average temperatures were between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius colder than today. Massive ice sheets covered most of northern Europe, including where London, Berlin, and Stockholm now sit, under glaciers sometimes more than 2 miles thick. The average January temperature in London today is around 5 degrees Celsius. During the Ice Age, that same spot was buried under ice and probably never saw a temperature above freezing for thousands of consecutive years. So if you're imagining something like a particularly rough British winter, you need to multiply that misery by about 50 and then remove all the heating, hot drinks, and thick-walled houses. That's where we're starting. Here's a number that should genuinely alarm you. Researchers estimate that just to survive the cold, not to run, hunt, or fight, just to exist, humans during this period needed somewhere between 3,360 and 4,480 calories per day. The average adult in Europe today needs around 2,000 to 2,500 calories with a fairly active lifestyle. Ice Age humans needed almost double that just to keep their core temperature from killing them before they'd done a single useful thing with their day. And that's not a coincidence. In freezing temperatures, your body burns calories constantly just to generate enough heat to keep your organs functioning, which means food wasn't just fuel for energy, it was literally the only thing standing between you and hypothermia. And the way you got those calories was not exactly popping to Tesco. You hunted. You foraged in frozen landscapes where plant life was scarce and unreliable. You chased animals that were, in many cases, enormous, dangerous, and extremely unhappy about being chased. Every single day was structured almost entirely around the question of finding enough food to not die. And on plenty of days, the honest answer was, you didn't find enough. That is, unless something very large and very woolly happened to cross your path. The woolly mammoth was the most important object in Ice Age human existence, and calling it just an animal feels like an understatement. A single mammoth could feed an entire group for weeks, which in calorie terms was genuinely life-saving. But humans weren't just eating mammoths, they were building their homes out of them too. Archaeologists in Mazirish, Ukraine, found circular shelters constructed almost entirely from mammoth bones, dating back around 18,000 years. The foundations were mammoth skulls and long bones pressed into frozen ground. The walls used tusks and flat bones as structural elements, and animal hides stretched over the frame for insulation. The reason was simple. In the vast open tundra of Ice Age Europe, timber was scarce, but mammoth remains were everywhere. So when you needed a house, you built it from the same creature you had for dinner. If that isn't the most efficient use of a carcass in human history, nothing is. Before you picture a cozy mammoth bone cottage with a little garden out front, the evidence tells a different story. Radiocarbon dating of the Mazirish structures suggests groups visited only briefly, sometimes just a few times over hundreds of years, before moving on when conditions demanded it. The classic image of the cave-dwelling prehistoric human isn't very accurate either. Rather than living deep inside caves, early humans in Europe more commonly built shelters against cliff faces and rock overhangs, draping animal hides from the natural ledges to block the wind, with a fire burning inside for warmth. A good shelter was the difference between surviving the night and not surviving it. And yet these people rarely had one that could be called permanent. You built what you could, used it while you needed it, and then you moved. Your entire life was essentially one long frozen relocation. And if you were going to survive that relocation, you needed to be wearing something considerably better than a loose animal hide. The invention of the needle around 30,000 years ago has been described by anthropologist Brian Fagan as the single most important invention in human history, and he's not being dramatic. Before the needle, early humans draped themselves in loose, ill-fitted animal hides that also doubled as sleeping bags and baby carriers. It was functional in the way that wrapping yourself in a curtain is technically clothing. It covered you, but it left enormous gaps for cold air to rush in and body heat to escape. The needle, carved from ivory or bone, changed all of that. It allowed for tight-fitting, tailored, layered clothing that actually trapped body heat effectively. Ice Age tailors selected different pelts, reindeer, deer, Arctic fox, and hare, scraping them clean with stone tools before sewing together 3 or 4 layers into shirts, trousers, and boots. But clothing could only solve one of your problems. The rest of them had teeth. Ice Age Europe was absolutely stocked with animals that viewed humans as prey, competition, or simply as an irritation worth removing. Cave lions were larger than modern African lions. Cave bears shared the same rock shelters humans were trying to use and stood considerably taller when they decided to stand up. And then there were the animals humans were actually trying to hunt, which were not remotely cooperative. Evidence suggests Ice Age hunters didn't throw spears from a safe distance. They physically braced the weapon and let the animal's own momentum drive it forward. That meant standing close enough to a wounded mammoth to be instantly killed if anything went slightly wrong. And things went slightly wrong all the time. In the Ice Age, losing your fire was a potential death sentence, and keeping it alive was treated accordingly. Fire-cooked frozen meat, dried soaking wet clothing before it killed you, and protected campsites from nocturnal predators circling just outside the light. Flint and pyrite were treasured objects, carried carefully whenever a group moved camp. When they moved, they took their embers with them, because starting a new fire from scratch in sub-zero conditions was occasionally impossible. The fire wasn't something you lit and forgot about, it was something you never allowed to die, because in a very real sense, if it went out, so might you. Ice Age communities were not isolated pockets of desperate survivors. They were interconnected groups that traded, communicated, and cooperated across vast frozen landscapes. Archaeologists have found tools, beads, and shells that originated hundreds of miles from where they were discovered. These networks allowed people to find mates, spread new technologies, and provided insurance during famines. When one group's hunt failed, a neighboring group could offer support. Some researchers argue this social connectivity is precisely why Homo sapiens outlasted Neanderthals, who maintained smaller, more isolated populations. Being friendly across a frozen continent was, it turns out, an evolutionary advantage. Deep in the caves of southern France and northern Spain, Ice Age humans painted some of the most technically sophisticated art ever produced by our species. Horses, bison, and mammoths, rendered in ochre and charcoal with skill that startled modern art historians. What makes this strange is the conditions. Painters ventured into oxygen-depleted cave passages with only animal fat lamps for light. Some researchers argue the oxygen deprivation was deliberate, that the altered state of consciousness was part of a ritual, the cave functioning as a temple. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. The Ice Age mind was doing far more than just surviving. It was reaching for something we haven't fully explained since. Ice Age humans had almost no free time in any meaningful sense. Every available hour was structured around survival, finding food, repairing clothing, tending fire, and preparing tools for the next hunt. Even the cave art and social gatherings served functional purposes. Rituals to improve hunting outcomes, ceremonies to maintain alliances. When researchers examine Ice Age bones, they find repeated physical trauma, healed fractures, and arthritis beginning in people still young by modern standards. These were not people thriving in a romantic wilderness. They were people working extremely hard every single day just to stay alive. So how would you have fared in the Ice Age? Honestly, probably not as well as you'd like to think. The people who made it through were not superhuman. They were relentlessly adaptive, creative, and cooperative in conditions that should have broken them entirely. And somehow, they also found time to make art that can still stop you cold 30,000 years later.